Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 220. The podcast explores work of think tanks across the country, the galaxy? No, just the country. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, we've got only two today. We've got Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm a little sad about the only two, as if that's
we're not
somehow
good
a problem.
enough.
Like, are we not good enough? Because I think only two is actually better.
All right.
Sometimes less is more.
While I introduce our next co-host here, you come up with a better phrasing of that, and I'll come back to you. Also joining us, we have Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, sir?
I am great.
All right, fantastic. Justin, you come up with anything?
No.
Okay, then lay off.
Remember when it was just John and Donnie for a really long time?
Yeah, I do remember that.
And there wasn't like this whole thing. Although the show wasn't as good then, so you could argue
it was
three
terrible.
is the optimal number. Yeah,
But forever they like didn't want anybody on the show. Like
Yeah.
they were so now it's like if there are only three, then it's terrible. But for the longest time there was only two. And that was okay. So what's up?
they had people tariffs on the show. They didn't want more coming in.
That's true.
Yeah, you're right.
And
They were protectionists.
You're right. John always wanted us to talk about boring topics, so hopefully we've strayed a little bit in the better direction.
I don't know that.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about a couple of things here. Actually, mostly just one thing. Our big socialism survey that Justin and I did, the Heartland Institute and Rasmussen put together. So we did actually start talking about this last week, and by last week I mean 2 weeks ago, and we kind of just really kind of rushed through it. So I wanted to really allot a good amount of time to give this the full attention that it needs, because there's a lot of stuff here. Justin, hopefully you have the spreadsheets pulled up. But yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that because it was pretty interesting stuff. Very socialism and authoritarian based in theme. But for marketing purposes of this podcast, I think we should talk about Baby Yoda and then just put that in the headline. And we'll get 1 million downloads.
Oh, for sure. And it should just be exclusively Baby Yoda memes in the description.
Right.
Hello, in today's episode of the In the Tank podcast, Baby Yoda, Baby Yoda, Baby Yoda.
Yeah, right. That's the podcast where we exclusively talk about how cute that Baby Yoda is. I assume everybody knows what we're talking about, but maybe for those that don't. The live action Star Wars show that's on Disney Plus. I probably should have phrased that better to make it not sound like a commercial. But anyways, it introduced the love of everybody's life across the world, Baby Yoda, who's the little sub-character in the show. And Isaac, a perfect proof of this is that when we turned on the recording device and we were talking to each other, I'm pretty sure that was the first thing you brought up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's a worldwide phenomenon. And Donald, did you know that you can get Disney Plus for the low price of $6.99 a month?
We're not being sponsored by Disney, so...
No, but we're hoping to get there.
That'd be amazing. That would be amazing.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
So,
Disney sponsors climate denial. That's the headline they're looking for.
I feel like this is going to turn very quickly into a scandal.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
This is really bad. We're heading down a very dangerous road right now. You know how many lawyers Disney has?
Right. Keep Disney Plus out of your filthy mouths.
The In the Tank podcast is the official podcast of Disney Plus.
Brought to you by Baby Yoda.
It's not. Disney lawyers, if you're listening, he's joking. We're not in any way claiming that we are somehow being sponsored by Disney Plus.
Well,
right.
I just love that. I'm absolved of guilt because it's the Heartland Institute's podcast and I'm just the guest.
Yeah,
so.
that's true.
You're just a reckless.
Yeah.
It's true. You are. You're a cowboy.
Bull
You're
in the
show's
china
official
shop.
Cowboy.
Justin has officially accepted Disney's endorsement.
Endorsement for what?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just endorsing me as a human being?
Yeah.
I'll take it. Sure.
I won't.
This is so dangerous. Actually, Donnie would take it before I would, probably. So
no way, man. I've been like the most critical of Disney on this podcast, talking about how they're like kowtowing to China.
You would tattoo their logo on your face if they if they were gonna sponsor you. You know you would. You would take that filthy money.
You should get like a henna tattoo of Disney on your face just to see if they will sponsor the show.
We have to go back to doing like a video podcast then, or else,
that's fine.
Who cares? I can claim that I'm doing that right now.
Right, Baby Yoda. It is funny how like that completely got people to stop talking about the fact that they totally kowtow to China.
That's true. And it's also like erased any of like the controversy around like The Last Jedi and how it like divided the fan base and all that. Everybody loves Baby Yoda. It's going crazy.
But I don't think that it's a good thing for Disney long term, because everything they do from now on has to have Baby Yoda. Otherwise, it's not as good.
Sure. Yeah. Well, 10 years from now, we'll have like the standalone Baby Yoda trilogy of movies and. All right, so have we wasted enough time talking about Baby Yoda to have it in the title, you think?
No, we haven't. Okay. There's one more thing I think that we should talk about, and it's the fact that Baby Yoda is trending higher than most of the 2020 Democratic candidates, which is amazing.
You know what? That is amazing, because it's like a purely positive thing that's trending, where like you go on Twitter and it's always just like horrible stuff that's trending. So yeah, I'll take that. It's a positive thing for society.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you think that that's a good enough segue to talk about the Democratic primary challenge that we have going on?
Sure. Yeah. I was going to save it for the end, but I guess we can talk about it now.
We could save it.
No. Let's do it now. That was a good segue. So, as our constant listeners will know, we do have a Democratic candidate survivor pool going between like the 5 people that are closely related to this show. And there was since our last recorded episode, there has been a few different developments in this. Not so good for me. So we go back to November 28th. Wayne Messam, who is some type of politician in Florida. That's all I know about him. He dropped out.
Baby Wayne.
Yep. We talked about him before because he raised a grand total of $5 in one of his fundraising quarters. So we knew that he wasn't going to stay on long, but the fact that he lasted this long has been really helpful to my team. So he ended up dropping out, which gave me 16 points in our pool here, which dropped me down to second place, I believe, underneath Justin. But then, hot on the heels of that, Steve, well, first off, is there any other fond memories that we want to reminisce about Wayne Messam?
Mr. $5 quarter.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's all we know. Or that, that
was the best. That was the most cost-effective advertising he could have possibly done, though.
Right. Yeah, he didn't pay us. We're not sponsored by Wayne Messam, so he got free publicity from us. But that and my suggested slogan for his campaign, Mess 'em Up. I'm pretty sure that the reason that his campaign tanked is because he didn't take over that slogan, so his loss. So then, hot on the heels of that, fast forward a couple of days to December 2nd, and Steve Bullock dropped out. So this was on Justin's team. So that dropped Justin below me in it. I went back up to first place, I believe. I could be mistaken.
I think you're mistaken. I think we were tied. But
well, no,
whatever.
I think I did some math, and I thought we were tied, but I think I was actually in first place. But whatever. So Steve Bullock drops out. Justin, he was on your team. Who is Steve Bullock? Do you even know?
No.
Isaac, do you know?
He's the former governor. Wait, he's the governor. Is he the former governor or current governor? He's either a former or current governor of some state out west. Montana?
Some state out west. That's the treasure state. You
Montana?
wash your East Coast mouth out with soap. God, I hate you, massholes.
It is really bad. It is.
I can't draw. Blah.
That's true. That's probably true. Yes, he is the governor of Montana.
Any fond memories of Steve Bullock
No.
before we reduce him to
I don't
just
have any. In order to have a fond memory, you have to have a memory.
Yeah.
I don't have a memory. So
well, Justin's
no
the oldest of all of us, and memory loss and dementia is a serious problem. I can't make those jokes about Jim today.
Yeah, right. I was trying to fit in.
Actually, I will anyway. Jim is old.
Yeah, okay.
Nice. That was good. So yeah, all right. Steve Bullock gone. Harley Newye. So 15 points to Justin for that one. And then the next day, and this one was crushing for my team. Absolutely crushing. Kamala Harris drops out of the Democratic primaries, giving me 14 points, dropping me to fourth to last. Only Andy is below me now. And she was my first-round pick. She was the first-round pick to drop out in this game that we've been playing. So my team is pretty much gone, but I do think that we have a little bit more fond memories of, or at least entertaining memories of this candidate, unlike the other ones. So was this comes as a shock to you guys, Kamala Harris dropping out like this?
I'm a little surprised that she dropped out. I mean, I figured at this point, why not just, I mean, she must be bleeding cash. She just must be just bleeding cash, because at this point, why not just wait until the primaries, the first two primaries? Even if you get destroyed in those primaries, isn't it worth at least saying that you participated, in the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary? I mean, it seems like everybody waits at least until then. So if you're dropping out before then, it means you're either so irrelevant that nobody even notices that you exist, which is the case with Steve Bullock, or you are hemorrhaging money and you just can't afford to continue staying in the race, which I guess is the case with Kamala Harris. But even then, just stay in the race, cut all your staff, and just see what happens. I mean, that's what I would do if I was in her spot. But she had no chance of winning. After the last several months, we realized that she's just really unlikable. And so it isn't shocking that she's dropping out at some point, but I'm a little surprised so close to these primaries that she just doesn't stick it out for another month or so and see what happens.
Yeah, there was a lot of news stories coming out about like her campaign being in shambles and people not being treated properly, stuff like that. So I knew that like kind of the writing was on the wall. I was just hoping that she would make it last longer than like a John Delaney or the Michael Bennett or some of these other people that we're not going to remember at all after they drop out. So I was a little disappointed in that, but we do have there's some fond memories during this campaign with her. I recall her fisticuffs between her and Tulsi Gabbard in some of the early primaries that actually seemingly did a lot of damage to Kamala Harris here. There was another time during one of the primaries where she like turned to Joe Biden and says like, can't we just destroy the Constitution? Like, can't we just say yes we can and forget the Constitution exists or something along those lines? I remember that was a source of comedy for a little bit. Any other things that you can recall of this blunder of a campaign?
Not to be honest, not really.
I got one more.
I just remember her being extremely unlikable.
That's true. Isaac,
that's what I remember.
Isaac, do you have any other memories of her campaign that we can kind of put into the book to memorialize this? Because I got one more.
Oh, just the fun Camilla's a cop meme that went around for a while. That was fun.
Right. The thing that I was referring to was the CNN town hall on climate change topics, where she came out like seemingly the hardest on like altering our meat consumption habits and using the government to like change the way that we eat as a country. And it just came off as so just like not on this planet. That's how like it did not resonate with anybody. And actually our survey kind of shows that to be the case. So we could use that as a segue, unless you want to talk more about this Democratic survivor pool. It looks like as of now, Justin and Isaac are tied in first place with 40 points. Justin still has Bernie Sanders and Marianne Williamson. And then just to round it out, this is before a couple of the other candidates jumped in, but we also included Bill Weld in our thing. So Justin has him as well. So Justin's sitting pretty. Isaac still has...
Who does Isaac have? Yeah, who does Isaac have?
He has Buttigieg. He has...
Cory Booker.
Cory Booker, yes. And
Amy Klobuchar.
So it's not looking too terrible for him because it seems
no,
like
no, I disagree. Isaac's screwed.
Oh, I'm sunk.
Buttigieg,
There's no way that Spartacus and who was the other one?
Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah, there's no way that either of those two stay in.
Oh man,
what if Buttigieg runs the table and takes the whole thing?
It doesn't matter because those two are going to go out before any of the three that I have.
Yeah, I mean, Marianne Williams is just so crazy that she'll never do it.
Right.
She'll take it to the convention.
In the Republican primaries, though, that like Mark Sanford, he dropped out, so it's not impossible that Bill Weld will end his campaign sometime soon.
Yeah, but still, I just don't. I mean, he's been in it this long, and he basically putzes around and goes to all of these conferences and stuff. Look, the reason I picked Bill Weld and the reason I picked Marianne Williamson is because I am a big believer in candidates who know they have absolutely no chance of winning at all, spend absolutely no money on their campaigns, and use this purely as an opportunity to get what little publicity they ordinarily would never be able to get, but are now getting as a result of this.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
these people are they're like on the lowest rung of the political ladder. And for them, this is the best it's ever going to get at this point. So they're not giving this up anytime soon. I mean, these are the glory days for these two rejects.
You're so right, and that's why I know that I'm sunk.
Well, Jim,
Exactly.
Jim is only 1 point behind both of you, and he has Elizabeth Warren. He has John Delaney and that Michael Bennett. So if they stay in, and I think everyone would think that they would already have dropped out by now, but if they stay in longer than they should, which they already are, then he's got an outside chance too of making this interesting. But
you're dreaming because you just want me to lose. There's no way I'm losing. This is now my race to win without question.
Well, that's true. What I want is
barring Bernie Sanders dropping dead.
God forbid.
Which I'm not rooting for. I want Bernie Sanders to win. I hope everyone in America knows this. I want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee. Okay, but unless Bernie drops dead, I'm gonna win this thing.
All right.
This is mine. It's all mine.
All right. No, what I do want, I don't want you to lose necessarily. I want this to be competitive to the end so that this remains interesting. And so far it is, although it's gotten less interesting for me when I'm sitting here with 53 points. But all right, well, let's move on. Let's move on to our big old survey. So, Justin, you want to explain the survey that we did? We did it with Rasmussen, blah, blah, blah. Give us the elevator pitch.
So in the middle of November, we got together with Rasmussen Reports, which is one of the top 3 or 4 polling firms in the United States, and we produced a poll about socialism, and sort of it molded into a poll about socialism and sort of the authoritarian tendencies of people who lean in the socialist direction, try to figure out where people who identify with socialism, where they stand on a variety of issues, in particular, free speech issues, climate change issues, gun rights, and then just sort of some of the presidential candidates as well. We asked a couple of questions about that. And it turned into being something a little bit broader than that. It ended up not being so hyper-focused on socialism, but really just sort of likely voters in general. And we found some really, really interesting things. Before we go into it, just sort of a big picture thing. The poll was, like as I said before, middle of November, 1,000 likely voters. So not registered voters, not all Americans, but likely voters, people who say that they're actually going to go out and vote. Obviously adults only. We had a wide it's a national poll, so a wide demographic. And because it was 1,000 voters, that's a pretty good sample size. So the plus and minus on all of these things is about 3 points for these questions. How do you want to go through the questions, Donnie? You want to just kind of run through some of the bigger questions we asked?
Let's do segment by segment. So Rasmussen thought it was a good enough poll. We'll pat ourselves on the back to release it in parts because we did cover several different topics here. So they release it in like 3 major parts. So I guess we should start off with like the socialism. Then maybe we can move on to firearms, do free speech after that. We'll close it out with climate change. And before we start running through some of these findings, Isaac, I sent you all of this stuff. So if you just want, wherever you want to chime in, just feel free to throw in any comments or whatever questions, concerns, etc. So, Justin, let's start off with socialism. The first question we asked, do you prefer socialism to a free market economic system?
Right, yeah. So 69%
Nice.
of likely voters, 69% said free market economic system, and 12% said socialism.
Right.
18% said not sure.
Yeah, so 12%. So we did a couple of radio. You were on Fox News doing all this stuff. I did some other radio stuff. And I was saying during my things, maybe your takeaway was a little bit different than mine, Justin, or even Isaac. I said 12% wasn't terrible in my opinion. Obviously, like our job is to try to reduce that down to 0, but I could live with 12%. Are you looking at it as a glass half full or half empty type of thing here?
Yeah, I think 12% is actually really, really strong. I think the next question is a little bit more disturbing. The next question was, would you vote for a presidential candidate who identifies himself or herself as a socialist? So the first question is, which is better, free market economics or socialism? The second question is, would you vote for someone who says that they're a socialist? And actually, I don't know why I thought this, but I sort of thought when we were making the questions that that there would be all these people who they like socialism, but they don't necessarily want to vote for someone who's a socialist because maybe they don't think the country is ready for that, or they don't think that the socialist could win or something like that. But actually, the reverse happened. 12% said that they think socialism is better than a free market system, but 26%, so more than double that, said that they would vote for a presidential candidate who identifies as a socialist. So that means there's twice as many people. There's a lot of people out there. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily think socialism is better, but they'd be willing to vote for a socialist anyway. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, sticking with that first question, though, do you prefer socialism or a free market system? So, yeah, likely voters 12%, but when you start looking at it in the demographics, we had it break down by like political ideology, and 26% of those that self-identify as a liberal, 26% said socialism. So that's more than 1 in 4. So that kind of concerned me because, like, you know, when you talk to somebody that's like, you know, promoting the idea of Scandinavian socialism, it's basically you can chalk that all up to like, you know, we want universal health care. But this question wasn't about universal health care or socializing that specific industry. This was about the whole economy together. So 1 in 4 liberals think that socialism is better than free markets. That was cause for concern.
In some ways, I'm surprised it's not larger, though.
You think so?
I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Isaac? You think that's small? I mean, I sort of think that. I think that 1 in 4 liberals saying that they think socialism is better at this point in time with the rise of Bernie Sanders and AOC and all those people. To me, it seems like that's actually not as high as I would have expected.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty good. And also, I don't even think our job is necessarily to talk to the 12% of people who think that, socialism is better. I mean, it's the 18% who aren't sure, which is really the people that we should be talking about.
Sure.
And then like the 69% of people who think free markets are better, we should, try to strengthen their resolve a little bit. So,
right.
I mean, that 12%, whatever, they're done. Their mind's made up.
You also start seeing in just these two basic questions about socialism, you start seeing another trend, which is basically the demographics that are most in favor of these socialism ideas. One of them is probably not a surprise to most, which is the younger age demographic. So we broke it up 18 to 39-year-olds. 19% of those said that they prefer socialism to free market economy. And that is more than double the other demographics, or age groups, I should say. So 40 to 64 was only 9%, and 65 plus was only 8%. And then similarly with the would you vote for a presidential candidate who identifies himself or herself as a socialist, 42% of that younger age group, 18 to 39-year-olds, 42% said that they would. And that's compared to 12% of 40 to 64-year-olds and only 10% of 65 plus. So, we did this Stopping Socialism project. We're doing this Stopping Socialism project here at the Heartland Institute. And one of our main ideas for this is that we wanted to kind of aim this project towards the younger audience. I think that this survey completely confirmed that we're aiming at the right targets.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's spot on. I don't think that's too surprising, of course.
No.
But I do think that that's really where this battle is going to be.
Is this a dramatic pause, or do we lose you?
It's gonna be what, Justin?
What is the country going to look like? No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I don't know why there was a dramatic pause.
Yeah, it was very dramatic. It was like ellipsis, ellipsis, ellipsis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
what was the question?
I don't know. Well, I'll just keep moving on. So the other
no, but
demographic.
it's, one thing I do want to add
Go
to
ahead.
that is I love the OK Boomer thing. I don't know if I've had a chance to talk about that, and I'm a little sad that Baby Yoda erased this from our collective memory. It's the only drawback to Baby Yoda is that OK Boomer and Epstein memes are down.
Sure. Yeah.
But when people talk about boomers and how they're mad, especially like millennials are mad about, all the perceived injustices that the boomers have foisted upon us, like we haven't even had a chance to screw up yet. Like that's the crazy thing. And when you look at these polling numbers, man, is that worrisome.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Yeah, it is. And it's also a perfect opportunity to attack boomers because they're the ones that educated all of these younger people. It wasn't like these younger people woke up and they were just born, favoring socialism. It was older people who had taken over the school systems in the 1960s and 70s and basically indoctrinated a whole generation of people into believing that socialized everything is significantly better than having a free society. I mean, that's what's happening here. I mean, it really is something that people need to take personal responsibility and do their own homework and understand the history of all these things. But when you have a school system in Hollywood and the media and the news, the press and all of that completely run by 50, 60-year-old people who are socialists from the 1960s or so, it's not surprising that a lot of younger people are leaning in that direction now. Right.
Which actually brings us, you mentioned the school system. That kind of brings me to my other demographic that I kind of highlighted here as being like the
Donnie
most in favor.
He's very excited.
That's true. Well, so... like when Justin sent me all of these notes or whatever, all the spreadsheet with all the different findings and whatever, the one that I zeroed in on, like pretty much the fastest, is that we had a demographic breakdown of like your employment, right? So it was like self-employed, private sector, I don't know, there was a couple of other ones, and then one was government, you're employed by the government. And like across the board, almost exclusively, like almost without exception, it was government employees were in favor of the most authoritarian aspects in this poll, and that shows in this section as well under that question of would you vote for a presidential candidate who identifies himself or herself as a socialist. 36% of government employees, which was the highest of any of these employment demographics, said yes they would. That's your school teachers, that's your local bureaucrats, that's your DMV workers that are in favor of these socialistic ideas more than anyone else.
Yeah, that's just amazing. It really, should we be surprised by this? I was on the Glenn Beck radio program earlier this week, and when this kind of thing came up, in fact, I think maybe that exact point that you just mentioned came up, Donnie, and he said, I'm not surprised by this at all. Are you surprised by this? And I thought about it and I said, you know what? No, not really. I guess I'm not, because these people have for a very long time, wanted the country to move in the direction of giving them increasingly more power. The school systems have become just overrun with people who lean in this direction. And it's a national survey that includes a question about government workers, which means that most of your government workers in your community are working at the local school. So is it really surprising that these people are they want more power for themselves? I mean, that's really what socialism is all about, is centralizing power in the hands of government bureaucrats.
Well,
so, I mean, I guess it's not that shocking, but it just really stuck out at me and you, obviously, when we first looked at this, because it's disturbing. Let's put it that way.
Well, Justin dropped a name, so I will too. Yesterday I was on the Wayne Allen Root show, And I also brought up this point about government employment or whatever. And he also was not shocked by this at all. He actually confirmed his suspicions, if you can call him a suspicion. Yeah, so he wasn't shocked by it at all either. So yeah, it's just kind of like maybe it's just us being these naive young folks that are kind of taken back by this idea. But nope, that's just par for the course apparently. Justin, there was one kind of major finding that I think both you and I think is one of the biggest parts of this entire survey. Do you know what I'm referring to, or do you want me to say it?
I think I do. I think the most well, I'm going to answer the question the way you let it up. Whether you agree with me or not is a whole different issue. In my opinion, the most important question in the survey, and we asked a lot of questions that we obviously haven't gotten to yet, but the most important question in the survey was, would you vote for a presidential candidate who identifies as a socialist? And what I thought was really interesting was that, we talked about 26% said yes to that. 50% of likely voters right off the bat say no. And 1 in 3 Democrats said no. And 20% of the most favorable Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren supporters, Elizabeth Warren supporters, 20% said no. So you had 22 and 10 of Bernie Sanders' most ardent supporters say they won't vote for a socialist.
Right.
And Bernie Sanders is a self-described socialist.
Yeah,
so
but
I
they won't believe that.
Really interesting. Well,
They'll
he
fool
calls
themselves.
himself a socialist all the time.
A democratic socialist. It's different.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, well, maybe that's true. Maybe they think of socialism and democratic socialism as so distinct that they answer the question differently. But I think that this is really important, because if you can classify all of these proposals as socialist, if you can make it clear to everybody that these are socialist proposals, single-payer healthcare, Green New Deal, etc., they aren't just common sense reforms or whatever. They are socialist policies. I think that's the key to convincing, because people know socialism is bad, but they don't necessarily know that these other specific policies are socialism. I don't think that they've made that connection yet. And the more that we can make that connection for them and fill in that gap and explain that to them, I think the better Donald Trump's chances are, frankly, and the better long-term conservatives, the better chances conservatives have of enacting policies that are going to promote freedom and prosperity for everybody in the long run. People don't want socialism. They just don't necessarily know that these policies being thrown out there right now are socialist policies.
Yeah. Yeah. To think that 1 in 5 of Bernie Sanders' most supportive, backers are potentially at risk if he's correctly identified as a socialist, I think has the greatest implications for the race. That is definitely the most important finding that I was alluding to. And then to Isaac's point, because I agree, I think there's probably a large percentage of those people that think that there is a big difference between democratic socialists and socialists. I think that just kind of highlights the goal that we have to show that socialism and democratic, quote unquote, socialism are, indistinguishable. You throw that word in front, it doesn't make it any better. So it just kind of really kind of confirms again that point that one of the objectives that we set off on with this Stopping Socialism project is right on target. So anything else you want to talk about this particular topic, or do you want to move on to some of these firearms findings?
Yeah, let's move on.
Oh, I don't know. I did want to say that I feel like using the word socialism all the time does risk the chance that it loses its impact over time. And I think that that's one of the reasons why that younger folks tend to be more in favor of it, because they've heard that everything is socialism so far. And they're like, oh, well, it hasn't been that bad. So, I guess that would be my one.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. And I think that that's actually that's actually a thing that I would consider when people try to pretend that Sweden is socialist. And then we've made that a big point of our project to say, no, these mythical Scandinavian countries haven't unlocked the key to making socialism work. In reality, they're not socialists. There are market economies that have big welfare programs. Yeah. So we actually just released a policy brief to that effect Justin, I don't know if you really want to give an elevator pitch on that, or if that's a topic for a different day.
Yeah, we'll talk about it next week. But I think Isaac's point is spot on, actually, and I think he was exactly right to correct the way that I was referring to it before. It's not that single-payer healthcare and all of these other things are in and of themselves socialism. It's what's important for people to understand is that the whole point of passing all those programs is to make us a socialist nation. That's the point. It's socialism is what we're seeing in countries like Venezuela and what they tried to do in the Soviet Union and what they tried to do in China and all of these other places around the world where it's failed miserably. Those places were much, much closer to socialism than Scandinavian countries have ever been, really, but especially lately. What we need to do is explain not that single-payer healthcare is socialism. It is a socialized industry when you do that, but it's not socialism in and of itself. And it's not to say that the Green New Deal is just socialism in and of itself, but rather that these policies are all designed to push us in that direction, to make us a socialist nation, that ultimately the long-term goal is to give the entire power, or really the entire economy, over to a centralized ruling class authority, to make those people in charge of virtually everything on behalf of the collective. But ultimately, that's the point, is to move us further in that direction. It's not to just have this one socialized industry and then we call it a day. It's not like if we get single-payer healthcare, Bernie Sanders will just say, okay, well, we got single-payer healthcare, so we're good. That's it. I'm going home.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just going to be on to the next thing. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Make us the whole economy socialized. That's the goal.
Yep, no doubt about that. All right, let's move on to our next little subsection here where we talked about firearms. So the two questions that we asked here is, do you support legislation that would ban private ownership of assault-style rifles? And question 2, do you support repealing the Second Amendment, which currently guarantees Americans' right to bear arms? So, you can go over the kind of the basic findings here, but in addition to that, were there some that kind of stuck out to you, Justin?
So I think I'm a little surprised by how high the support for a ban on assault-style rifles was. Mm-hmm. It was about 49% of likely voters. It was a pretty high percentage of Republicans. I don't have that in front of me at the moment. 32% of Republicans. So that's 1 in 3 Republicans say that they support a ban on that. 43% said no. 8% said not sure. So on the one hand, I think it's a little surprising, 49% when you hear that. That's pretty high. That's half of all voters, right? But I was actually simultaneously surprised at how low it was amongst independents, because for independents, it was less than 50%. 43. I think it was somewhere in the low 40s,
43.
Something like that. Right. So that's pretty low for independent, because you would think if independents were going to support any kind of gun legislation, it would be this. It would be a ban on assault-style rifles. That would be the thing that they would want more than anything else. And yet less than half of them, even that demographic, said, no, I don't want to ban assault-style rifles. So when you think about it like that, it really does poke a gigantic hole in this narrative that Democrats have been promoting for a very long time now, that this is what everybody wants. It's just the NRA types that don't want this.
Sure.
Actually, that's not true. There are some Republicans that want it, which is a little strange, but most independents actually don't want it, or they don't know if it's a good idea. So I think that was really the most interesting thing for me in relation to the assault-style rifle question.
Yeah, a couple of other findings on that. 69% of the people that said that socialism is better than the free market supported that type of ban. 74% of those that have a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders support that ban. 77% of those that would vote for a socialist support that ban on assault-style rifles. And one of the highest percentages was 81% of those with a very favorable view of Elizabeth Warren support a ban on assault rifles. So yeah, I thought those numbers were a little bit high too, for my liking. Isaac, feel free to chime in, or else Justin, feel free to dive into the complete repeal of the Second Amendment question.
Yeah, so I think the next question we asked, we only asked 2 questions about gun rights in the survey. The first one was about assault style rifles. The second one was, do you support repealing the Second Amendment, which currently guarantees Americans' right to bear arms? 24% of likely voters said yes, 66% said no, 10% said not sure. So I actually found this pretty encouraging overall. I was worried it would be higher. When you actually started looking at the crosstabs for how various groups answered this question, 46% of those who said they have a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders said that they support banning the Second Amendment.
Right.
Only 30%, though, of those who had a somewhat favorable view of Sanders said they supported banning the Second Amendment, which was actually, I thought, a pretty positive thing to see. And with Elizabeth Warren, it was somewhat similar results to that. So I don't know. I was actually a little bit more encouraged by this than some of the other things that we saw, because, I mean, if you told me that less than half of very favorable Bernie Sanders supporters support banning the Second Amendment, that means more than half aren't sure, that they don't support it. I actually think that that's a pretty positive development, and it's interesting that the left spends so much time talking about that issue when it seems like it's not even that important to the people who are the very favorable supporters on the farthest left side of the spectrum in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that, although the 24% of likely voters thing was a little concerning to me. Almost 1 in 4 of likely voters want to get rid of the Second Amendment. I mean, that's a little, I don't know. I think that's too high for me to sit comfortably. And then also those 2 demographics that I kind of pointed out at the beginning of this whole conversation were a little bit higher than I would ever want them to be. 33% of those in the age group of 18 to 39-year-olds supported the repeal of the Second Amendment. So 1 in 3 of that age group wants to get rid of it. And then also, and that's way higher than the other age groups, obviously. And then 32% of government employees, which again was the highest of any of the employment demographics, wanted to get rid of that.
Right, and 1 in 3 Democrats overall. So what you're seeing there is that, which I think is really interesting, that really the younger voters, 18 to 39, Democrats overall, and government workers almost exactly, like, all within 1 point pretty much of each other on this question. So they pretty much, it's very similar demographics, those 3 groups. And I think that throughout all of our questions, we found that was kind of that was the case. I mean, government workers lined up pretty closely with younger voters, and Democrats overall, I think because of the support for younger voters sort of driving things up, kind of fit in line with that as well. So this is the direction of the Democratic Party going forward. And it's the direction of the Democratic Party going forward, I think, in large part because younger voters, this is the direction of younger voters, especially within the Democratic Party. And I think the reason that exists is because you have all these government workers who share that view, right? So government workers are the ones teaching younger people, and the younger people are the ones driving the direction of the Democratic Party. So it all kind of lines up. But I didn't expect that to happen before we saw the results of the poll. So it was very interesting.
All right. Isaac, any last thoughts on this topic here, firearms, or should we move on to free speech?
Let's move on to climate change.
Now we're saving that one for last, man. That one's the best.
Right.
Gotta save best for last. Although there is some really good stuff in this free speech one, too. So, Justin, I'll kind of let you take it away, but the questions that we asked here is, should federal or state governments ban speech by individuals that a majority of Americans believe to be offensive, including speech considered to be racist or sexist? So before you jump into some of the results, I just wanted to say that we specifically crafted this question in this particular phraseology, because it is government banning speech. It's not whether or not you dislike it. It's you want the government to ban speech that a majority of Americans believe to be offensive. So this is just like a 51% thing. This isn't that there's a total consensus that this is a terrible speech or something. So we purposely set the bar really low and the implications really high. And so, yeah, Justin, what were our findings here?
Yeah, so 27% of all people, 1 in 4 of all likely voters, said yes, governments, federal or state governments should ban speech that a majority of people find offensive. The numbers were really high amongst younger people and government workers. 37% of young people said yes to this question, ban speech, and 42% of government workers said yes. 42%. Only 50% said no, which I think is really low on this question.
Yeah.
And 24% said, I don't know. Maybe they should ban speech. I don't know. Actually, the actual answer was not sure. But I mean, how can you not know? How can you not have an opinion about this question one way or the other? I mean, that's a really strange thing in and of itself. So this was a really disturbing question.
Right. And 51% of those that with a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders said yes. And 49% with a very favorable view of Elizabeth Warren said yes. So almost,
and I think it shows you and that was one of the things we were looking for, right? What are the authoritarian tendencies of that demographic? And I think we're seeing that there. Half of them say, "Yep, ban speech, ban it. We don't want because really this question is saying we don't want the First Amendment because everybody knows the First Amendment protects freedom of speech." And so that's what this is really saying. We don't want the First Amendment. Half of Bernie Sanders supporters are basically saying
very favorable.
Nope, don't want it.
Yeah,
very favorable supporters, right?
So then our second question. This is the first time I think in our questions where we start getting into like the built-in kind of cross-referencing or whatever. So the next question was, should those who violate such bans against offensive speech be punished with jail time? So this is only answered by people that said yes to that first question, people that want it banned. So some of these numbers will seem high, but you have to incorporate that only a certain percentage said yes to that first question. So of the people that said yes, we should ban this type of speech, 48% said yes, that this should be punished with jail time. I mean, now you don't get more authoritarian than that. Like this is crazy levels here.
It absolutely is crazy levels. And if you think about half of Bernie Sanders supporters and half of Elizabeth Warren supporters, very favorable Elizabeth Warren supporters, half of those people say yes, we should ban speech. And so if we assume that this 50% who say jail time overall holds true for those groups too, that means that basically a quarter of Bernie Sanders supporters and a quarter of Elizabeth Warren, the very favorable group, that a quarter of them think we should throw people in jail for saying offensive things. Right. I mean, that is really, really disturbing.
Yeah, one of the worst ones for me was, again, my favorite one to look at, which was the government employees. So for the first question, banning the speech, period, 42% of government employees, which was the highest of any of the employment demographics, I think by far on this question. And then going down to the second one, 62% of government employees said yes, jail time for that type of banned speech. So if you multiply those together, that gives you the number. But when you're doing this much of the kind of cross tabulation, that minus plus or 3 percentage margin probably goes up a little substantially. So you kind of have to take this number with a grain of salt here. But you multiply the 42%.
Probably goes up a little massively.
but it still leaves you with like 30% of government employees that think that it should be banned and punishable with jail time.
Was there an unemployed demographic that you guys looked at?
No.
That would be interesting too.
That must have been lumped in under other.
Okay. Yeah, probably. It probably was lumped in under other. Although you could probably think that most of the other is probably unemployed because basically every other thing that you could come up with, the categories were so broad outside of government that it probably is unemployed at that point.
Yeah, the other one that was substantially high for both of those answers was people that thought that socialism was a better system than free markets. 45% of those people wanted to ban speech, and 68% of those that said that it should be punishable by jail time. But again, those numbers are kind of getting so small, I don't really know if that's even worth kind of separating that out. The third question that we asked in this little subsection here is, should those who say or write things a majority of Americans believe to be offensive, including speech considered to be racist or sexist, be banned from holding public office, such as becoming a member of Congress or president of the United States?
Oh, man.
So we asked this question for obvious reasons, because
Right.
that's the accusation that's lobbed at, Donald Trump. And so the findings on this, 38% said yes. Little concerning there, because again, it's a really low bar of what you could consider to be sexist or racist. I think we know that just by watching any bit of news or media.
Right. And remember that 27% said yes to banning speech. So this is a lot higher than that.
Yeah,
this is
good
11
point.
percentage points higher. Said yes, because this is not the smaller demographic. This is all people.
Yeah.
38% of all of the respondents that we asked these questions to said yes, we should ban these people from holding public office. But think about how crazy that actually is. Basically, what you're saying is if a majority of people get together and say, we think this person over here is offensive, then you can prevent them from holding any kind of public office, basically.
Right.
Well, then that's authoritarianism, essentially. Because what's the standard here? It's just you think that someone is offensive. You can label anybody offensive anytime you want, whenever you feel like it. So this is a really, really authoritarian answer to say this.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's worse even than some of the other questions we asked.
54% of those government employed. 54%. And again, highest of that demographic or whatever, that was 54%. So over half of government employees said yes to this. 61% of those with a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders said yes to this, and 67% with a very favorable view of Elizabeth Warren said yes to this as well.
Two-thirds of those very favorable Elizabeth Warren supporters say, yep, do not let people hold office if they say something offensive. Again, just keep this in mind. Again, this is a First Amendment right we're talking about here.
Right.
You have a right to say anything, publicly. You have a right to do that. So this is even if you think that these people really are racist or sexist, and we worded the question very clearly so that we made it obvious that it's all the only standard we have is a majority of Americans believe it's offensive.
Right.
It doesn't actually have to meet some kind of magical standard that proves that it is offensive. Just a majority of people have to believe it. And you had 2/3 of very favorable Elizabeth Warren supporters say, yep, take away their First Amendment rights.
Yeah, and
they don't deserve it.
Similarly to how we carefully worded the first question, we specifically mentioned in this question that they should be banned from holding office. It's not whether or not you would vote for that person,
right?
Right? Because whatever, that could be much higher, and we wouldn't care. This is banning them.
Right, and on another sort of interesting comparison, we just talked about the gun rights questions. Isn't it interesting that that people are more willing to ban speech than they are guns?
Right.
That's very interesting to me. So people essentially are more afraid of free speech than they are of weapons.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really strange.
That's actually
public
a very good
speaking
point.
is the number one fear out of everyone. So
Good
I guess
That's a good point, Isaac. That's true.
All
So
right.
maybe what they're hoping for is that if we just ban all speech completely, then no one will ever have to speak in public again, and that solves their fear, right? That
right.
makes sense.
Let's move on to climate change. This is our last kind of major subcategory here. So we asked several climate change questions. Several of them were contingent off the first one or maybe the second one. But the two basic ones that we started off with was, how likely is it that climate change will be catastrophic for humans, plants, and animals? Very likely, somewhat likely, not very likely, or not likely at all. And then our second question, which I think is probably the most important, is climate change caused primarily by human activity or by long-term planetary trends? So, Justin, give us our basic findings here.
Right. So 43% said it is very likely that climate change will be catastrophic for humans, plants, and animals. And I thought that was actually pretty high considering all things considered, right? 43% say catastrophic.
I thought it was low.
They think that. Really? I thought it was high because 20% said somewhat likely. So that means when you add those two together, it's 63% say it's very likely or somewhat likely that climate change will be catastrophic.
But the fact that we're just like constantly inundated on every front about like how much of a disaster climate change is going to be, like I wouldn't have been surprised if it was like north of 70%. So I thought it was relatively low considering that.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Isaac?
Yeah, be the tiebreaker here, Isaac.
I'm not really surprised.
Not very surprised. That is
right, so just,
expert analysis.
Right in the middle there. Great job. All right,
the second question is climate change caused primarily by human activity or long-term planetary trends? Now, this one really surprised me. 48% said human activity, 38% said long-term planetary trends, 14% said not sure. That means more people said long-term planetary trends or not sure than human activity. And I would have thought, frankly, that it would have been the other way around. So I was surprised. That really surprised me. So when you add this question to the other question, because remember, when you think about climate change, what really matters is, do you believe it is both caused by humans and catastrophic?
Right.
Because if you don't think that it's catastrophic, then it doesn't really matter that it's caused by humans. And if you do think it's catastrophic, but you don't think humans are causing it, then all of these laws and regulations and everything else, that's all irrelevant too. So the two combined is what matters. And when you combine those two, what you find is that it's much less than half think that it is both catastrophic and that it is caused primarily by humans. And that's really great news for our side, because that's what we're arguing all the time, is that there are a lot of people on our side of the issue that are frankly do not know whether humans are primarily responsible for global warming or not. There are people on our side of the issue who say that they think humans maybe are contributing most of the global warming, but that it's not going to be catastrophic. And then there are people who think that humans are not causing it primarily and that it's not going to be catastrophic.
Right.
It's a huge tent that we have on our side of this issue. And what we saw here is that most Americans agree with us. They would fall within our tent somewhere. We don't know exactly where, but they would agree with us that humans are not causing a climate catastrophe. Right. At least the majority of the people, of voters anyway.
Very important finding. And then we asked like 3 follow-up questions, 3 or 4, I think. That these are only asked to the ones that said that it was human activity caused. So that was like 48%, right? 48% of the people responded to these next 4 questions. So the first one, should federal or state governments punish with fines or jail time fossil fuel business owners and or executives? And 50% of the people that said human activity said yes to that. So that was pretty high, I thought. Let me
very scary.
Let me run through these 4, and then you could pick whichever one you want to respond to. Should federal or state governments require people to engage in activities that will lower carbon dioxide emissions? 76% of those people that said it was human caused said yes to that. Should federal or state governments require people to limit their air travel to help stop climate change? This was one of the lower ones. Only 34% of people said yes to that. And the least popular of the authoritarian solutions to these problems, quote-unquote solutions, should federal or state governments require people to limit their consumption of meat to help stop climate change? Only 24% of people said yes to that. So, Isaac, you were going to jump in?
Oh, yeah. I was more interested in the crosstabs that you looked at down below with the Bernie and Elizabeth Warren voters.
Yeah, go ahead. Did you see them? Do you have them?
Yes, I did. I looked at them. I closed them on my computer, but
I do have
the gist
them.
of it.
No, I have them. I have them.
Look at me. I'm Donnie. I have all the answers.
Do you want me to go through them? So
yeah, run through them.
So this is there is 78.
I'm ordering you to run through them.
78% of those with a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders said that it is primarily human cause. So the next numbers are out of that 78%. So this is, pretty good numbers still. 50% of those with a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders said that, yes, that people should be held accountable or whatever. They should be punished with the business executives or whatever should be punished with jail time or
fuel
fines.
companies should be held accountable.
Right. Should the government require people to engage in activities that will lower carbon dioxide emissions? 66% of those with a very favorable view of Bernie Sanders said yes to that, and then it was only 36% for the air travel and only 28% for the food consumption.
What hypocrites?
A little bit. I'll let you take that, but I will say, just to kind of tie it back to our Kamala Harris thing, that her going on that long stuff about limiting our meat consumption across the board was like the most unpalatable solution for like any people that were being surveyed during this poll. So maybe that's what sunk her campaign. I don't know. Isaac, go ahead.
Well, wasn't she talking about like, well, I like a hamburger once in a while.
Once in a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the numbers were very similar to the Elizabeth Warren, very favorable. It was 79% said it was human activity, but the rest of the numbers were very in line with what the Bernie Sanders supporters said.
Yeah, but if that's what you believe, then those numbers should be inverted for the plane travel and the meat consumption. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense for climate change to be an existential crisis and then, oh, never mind, you can fly wherever you want to.
Sure. Well, maybe if I give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe it's that they don't think that it's the government's role to enforce that type of thing.
Oh, shut up. You know that's not true.
Yes, I do. By the rest of these findings in our survey, yes, I do know that now. So.
Maybe they just think that the government doesn't have the authority to do it.
Baloney.
But they should also throw people in jail for saying something offensive. So yes, no, you are right.
Oh, yeah.
I retract my benefit of the doubt. I retract it.
Yeah, the thing that's offensive is I'll have 2 meat patties, please.
With bacon.
Oh, man. Yeah. Put some cheese on that, baby.
Justin, any other interesting findings in your opinion, or are we wrapping this up?
No, I think we can wrap it up. I think what we've seen throughout all of this, though, is that if on the issue of climate change in particular, if you do believe that humans are causing climate change, then those people have a tendency to be pretty authoritarian about figuring out how to solve that problem.
Sure.
I think that's a big takeaway. I think the other big takeaway, other than what we talked about at the very beginning with the fact that most voters don't want socialism, I think the other big takeaway is freedom of speech. How willing so many of these people are to just destroy the First Amendment.
Right.
That is really disturbing, especially among younger people, especially among government workers and some of these other people. I think those are sort of the 3 really big takeaways from the survey. So yeah, it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I love surveys. And so this was great. We learned a lot, Donnie and I did, when we put this together and talked to Rasmussen and their experts there. And we've had a lot of media attention. I think we should at least point that out, that the survey has been used all over the place. Washington Times wrote a couple of stories about it.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, Breitbart did it. I had a story about it. Rush Limbaugh talked about it. I had an appearance on Tucker Carlson to talk about one of the surveys. Glenn Beck radio program, I mentioned that earlier. Fox and Friends. Donnie did 3 radio shows this week, Donnie, right? At least.
Right.
So lots of really good press for this. And so hopefully we're going to do this again, because I think it was great. I think we learned a lot of really interesting things from it. And I think if we can start sort of narrowing down on specific topic areas, drilling down on specific topic areas, we can really learn a lot about what American voters are actually thinking about a lot of these issues, and ask the questions that a lot of other polling firms just simply aren't asking.
Yeah, and I would also inquire other people that are really interested in polls as well, because I think Justin and I probably spent way too much time just like sifting through all of the raw data that we have, these massive spreadsheets of all the different cross tabulations. For other people that are like really interested in this type of polling, feel free to like send us a suggestion of what you think that we should do another poll on, because as Justin was just mentioning, this was a huge success. We got a lot of attention for this, so it's going to be something that we're going to do again. So just shoot us an email, what you think would be a good idea that you'd be interested to see, where people stand, likely voters usually, on whatever topic.
Coach Mendoza.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Where you at, Coach? What do you want us to
Yeah, we
ask
haven't heard from you in
America?
a while.
Coach has been MIA.
Yes,
I'm
he
worried
has.
about him.
Yes, he has. He's probably been taken out. But yeah, so shoot us an email inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. We would definitely read it and take it into consideration. But gentlemen, we have to wrap it up. Any last words of wisdom, anecdotes, jokes, anything you want to get off your chest before we leave it? Good talk.
No.
All right. Thank you all for
talk.
tuning in for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Please join us every Friday for a new episode. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. We would greatly appreciate it. You can also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, pretty much everything nowadays. If you would like, you can follow us on Twitter @InTheTankPod. Or you can send us those emails, anything that you want. Shoot us a message at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter, posting Baby Yoda memes at the fracking guy.
Fantastic. And Justin, same question. Where can the fine people find you?
Facebook and Twitter @Justin T. Haskins. Also, follow our Stopping Socialism page on Facebook. We're up to 35,000 followers. It's growing like crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, Isaac, right? 35,000. So go to Facebook and Stopping Socialism. I think that's the handle. If you just type in Stopping Socialism into Facebook, you'll be able to find it and follow it. Stopping Socialism, and go to stoppingsocialism.com, and you can see a lot of the survey results here and a whole bunch of other stuff we're doing at Stopping Socialism.
Fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.